Hello everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Rationally Speaking with myself, Stuart Carrington, and Martin Turner.
The idea of a significant other in film, in media and literature is often a reflection of ourselves. So all of us have got this kind of sensei part of our minds, which is very rule-based, very rigid, very dogmatic, can be very negative, and you can use that to help you with things, and it's a part of all of us, and in some ways we have to utilize it and integrate it into who we are. So that's part of us all, and we have to figure out what to do with that. How do we exercise it? How do we use it? How do we stop it from taking over and really driving our behaviours? We've got to mediate that. We have to mediate that side of us. So I think we often see that in films. We have a specific character that plays a specific role that is driving some of that dogma, some of that rigidity. But really, the metaphor is, well, that's you. That's inside of us all, and I think it's what makes these characters so powerful. Is we hate them on one hand, but we also relate to them on the other, because there's part of us that's like that.
Oh, you've just set up the next one perfectly, Martin. Let's talk about Daniel LaRusso. So Ralph Macchio's character, he's the title character in The Karate Kid. What I like about this character, and I know I'm coming across like a fanboy now, but I am, so I have no shame there, is that he's very nuanced. It's not like he's all good. So there are times in the first film where he lets himself down. So he has a hot temper, for instance. He can't stop kind of biting at Johnny's bait occasionally, and so on and so forth. And so his teacher, his sensei, Mr. Miyagi, and Mr. Miyagi is very forgiving. He's very accepting of Daniel as a person. He understands that Daniel is a fallible human being, like we all are. He even understands his own, Mr. Miyagi I'm talking about now, his own kind of limitations and flaws, and other people's limitations and flaws. He's very forgiving, for instance. Like at one point he even says there's no such thing as a bad student, only a bad teacher, for example. So don't be too harsh on these individuals that are perhaps being socialized or led astray or hold these beliefs. So I guess a couple of things we can talk about here. The first is we can see how significant others can socialize us in a negative way, but also perhaps in a positive way by reinforcing rational thinking. But then additionally, I guess we want to touch upon this notion of acceptance. And Ellis was keen to promote universal self-acceptance, or USA, but he also spoke about universal other acceptance and universal situation acceptance.
Yeah, well, I think Ellis was, I wouldn't say he got there first, but he was one of the very early proponents of acceptance. Now, acceptance can mean other things. Obviously, we have acceptance commitment therapy, and there are other modes and forms of acceptance. But Ellis's acceptance isn't like a passive, like, oh, well, that's a shame, it didn't work out, or oh, well, that's me, then I'm just a fallible human being, so I'll never succeed at anything. Ellis's acceptance and REBT's acceptance, as it's been refined over the years, is more like active acknowledgement of reality. It's like, okay, that's happened. That's now a solid, real experience. So what's my next behavior? What's my next choice? How do we move on from this? How do we take what has happened and grow and learn? So that it's kind of acceptance, because it's changed. Other forms of therapy have taken on that word. Acceptance in RBT means something different to those other modes of therapy. It means something different to the dictionary definition of acceptance. This is about saying I actively acknowledge that I'm a normal human being. Whatever a human being is, I'm just one of those. I'm going to succeed. I'm going to fail. I'm going to do good stuff. I'm going to do bad stuff. But I can never be wholly good or wholly bad. or complete failure or complete success, or so it's just that kind of balance that REBT offers, even within that idea of acceptance. You have to see it as a nuanced, balanced. I wouldn't say to process, but it's just an idea that you have about yourself that's more nuanced and balanced and is based in reality rather than I'm 100% this or 100% that. Yeah.
And interestingly, like in the film, particularly in the original film, Daniel's teacher will talk about balance quite extensively. We have a quote later on where balance is mentioned, for instance. But also there are kind of these signs that we can pick up in the film that shows that Mr. Miyagi doesn't believe in this kind of global self-evaluation that you just said. I.e., if I fail at something, it might be tempting to think, well, now I am a failure. But that's not necessarily true. And likewise, if we succeed at something, it doesn't mean that I am now a success. That's just something that has occurred, and I can accept that sometimes I win and sometimes I lose and sometimes I do well and sometimes I don't. So, for instance, like Mr. Miyagi, he doesn't have his war medals on show. Even though Dan's you should have these like on display. And he's like, yeah, it's like, that's just something that happened to me. Likewise, when bad things happen, it's okay, that wasn't nice. I didn't like it very much, but I'll move on and I'll try to learn from that. And I guess this is this difference, or this nuanced difference between kind of acceptance in a passive way and then what we might call active acceptance.
Active acceptance, yeah. And also it's where it links a bit to self-efficacy. If you define yourself as a complete failure, then how can you go into the next situation with any confidence? Because you're bound to fail because you've defined yourself as a complete failure.
Yeah.
Then on the reverse of that, if you don't do that, then it opens you up to being able to succeed in the future, and to put the apparatus around that to make it happen, to learn things, to change things. If you define yourself as complete success, then it's like, well, okay, no learning needed. So either position is seen as suboptimal. If it feels positive to say I'm a success, but it's suboptimal. Feels very negative to say I'm a complete failure. It's suboptimal. No, each of those extremes is not the best way to go about things. That's REBT's position. It makes sense. It's sensible, isn't it? This isn't. Hopefully, to people listening, this hopefully shouldn't sound like a crazy idea.
Yeah, I also like that. Again, if we can go back to these films, we see kind of like signs where Miyagi is showing that, well, we might not like these situations, but we can kind of actively choose something about them. There's a wonderful line in the third film where Daniel's saying like he's scared, like he actually doesn't want to fight an opponent because he's feeling fear, and Miyagi says to him like, it's okay to lose the fight, but you mustn't lose to fear. Like, so we can accept that this is scary, that this might be fearful, but don't let the outcome like define you. Like that process would be much more important than just defining yourself on winning or losing. And I guess this is like a message that this particular sensei is teaching. And what we're going to see now is this in the next couple of slides is you mentioned this precarious position. And what happens if we lose balance? We're going to see that shortly with Johnny in particular. So this is the end. This is the sort of the climactic scene of the first film. So this is after the tournament that concludes Karate Kid #1, and Daniel has beaten Johnny in the final. And
spoiler alert for.
I mean, the film's like 35 years old, mate. Like, if you haven't seen it, like, I'm not taking any responsibility for this. So we have, okay. Johnny's lost, guys. So sorry about that. And here we have his sensei, and he's got him in a neck lock, chokehold, whatever. And interestingly, the line that's said before this is they're arguing in the car park, like of the sports center, right? And Kreese, the sensei, the bad sensei, he's snapped Johnny's trophy over his knee, and Johnny's like, "I bought you second place." Now, obviously, he's won the previous 2 years, and he's like, what's your problem? And Kreese says to him, it's second place. You're nothing. You're worthless. You're a loser. And like that's like the exact quote. And then Johnny kind of reacts emotionally to this, understandably, I guess, and says, you're the loser, man. So then this is what instigates this. Now, Miyagi and Daniel could easily just walk away because these are kind of like the antagonists of the film. It's like, well, these people have been really nasty to me. Like this is their problem. just let them deal with it. And Miyagi goes over and sort of says, just let the boy go now. And then there's like a fight. Miyagi ends up like winning that kind of altercation in a very peaceful way. But I guess our point here is this word like you're nothing, you're a loser. And this goes back to that global evaluation that you were talking earlier on. Like he's lost one fight. Even on that day, he's won more because he's got to the final. But because he lost the final, he's a loser. And I guess what we want to talk about how harmful that global evaluation is.
Well, yeah, it's so final and so total, you see, and it doesn't leave any wiggle room for learning or growth. It's like, that's you now, that's your identity, you're worthless, you're a failure.
Yeah, it's definitive.
It's definitive, and as we said a little bit earlier, links to self-efficacy. Well, how can I mount the confidence and the courage to approach other challenging situations if I'm coming from a position of, well, I'm a failure, and therefore I probably won't be successful at things. When obviously in reality you'll succeed and fail. The idea would be, if you want to be successful in a particular career, would be that you succeed when it really matters, or try to succeed more than you fail. But the idea that you wouldn't fail is obviously rubbish, and therefore failure is just a kind of like a sign of your humanness and the unpredictability and uncontrollability of the environment. Now, REBT and myself are very careful of catchphrases like failure is feedback, fall forward. You often hear that as well. You can think about it however you want, but ultimately failure is just a signal that you're human. Humans fail. We succeed as well. And the reason success is valuable and important is because we're fallible, because we're limited as human beings, and because the environment is uncontrollable and unpredictable and dangerous. It makes our success more impressive and more valuable, in the same way as choosing to do something good is valuable, because there's always the bad option. So, it's that counterbalance really of the two that you need. But the idea that you'd be 100% one thing, it kind of limits our behaviour, it limits how we go forward into new things, limits our learning, limits our reflective capacity to actually look back and say, okay, well, I could change a few things, because it's just final. It's just so totalistic.
And that notion there, limiting, like you've mentioned this word, precarious, these are things that I think we're going to see manifest themselves in Johnny quite extensively as we see how his life progresses following this event.
Well, I think, as well, just to add there, Stu, the data tell us some interesting things about global evaluation as well. It's the belief that seems to be most highly linked to symptoms of depression. You can imagine if you're telling yourself all the time that you're worthless and you're a failure and you're an idiot, then that's going to start to deflate you quite significantly. We're going to start to get down, and that's going to get worse as we spiral. And it shapes our behaviour. So then we start to restrict ourselves, withdraw ourselves, therefore reinforcing the fact that we're worthless and we're failures. So you're then down, you're down into a nasty spiral. But this scene that you're talking about, this idea, it's like a nice culmination for a film, for example. But I always thought in this it would have been interesting if the antagonist, if he'd have won, because that sometimes happens. It's like that person that is rigid and extreme and brutal to an extent. Sometimes they do come out on top, and obviously we're talking about a successful athlete here too, who has won many things. But again, it's like, okay, what's the cost? That person's won this trophy, but they're paying the price usually in other ways. And they might seem like a big deal within this context, but actually they haven't managed their lives in lots of ways, because those beliefs do not transact into life very well. The extreme, dogmatic, rigid belief systems, they don't really work for life. They might work in this very specific context, and there's an argument around that. I'm not saying they do or work or don't work. They might work. but they don't really transact for life. They're not useful things for people in terms of approaching life as a human being.
I mean, now you've really set up the next slide. You're going to like this one. Here's Johnny at not the beginning of Cobra Kai, but it kind of is, because this isn't one of the later episodes, but they flash back to kind of maybe what he was like at the beginning, where it's Cobra Kai kind of is a spin-off series that is taking place. I'm going to get the timelines perhaps a little bit wrong here, but maybe like 40 years after the events of the first film. Now, we see like two very different characters. So Daniel LaRusso, Ralph Macchio's character, he's very successful. He's happily married. He's got 2 kids. He owns a car dealership that's doing very well. He lives in the rich part of California, where Johnny used to live, incidentally. And Johnny's situation has reversed, and he's a drunk. He's doing kind of menial jobs. He's trying his best to make ends meet. He's in an apartment. He's frequently late with his rent. He's out of shape. And in this scene, it shows him going to his mother's grave. And then he breaks down and he cries. And he says, "All it took to destroy me was someone to call me a loser." And it was that definitive statement of like, so you lost, now therefore you are nothing. And as a result of that karate tournament, that, like you just said, it didn't transact very well in his life. Those beliefs didn't help him. His self-efficacy, his resourcefulness, his appraisal of himself was completely eradicated by that definitive statement. And I guess this is what you're saying when, okay, well, it might work in this particular context, but at what cost? And this is the cost.
Yes, Jim, I think that's really important. It's kind of one of the trickier conversations that we can have with people, I think, because it's like, well, there's this belief that I have, and it's leading to suffering potentially. Like, I'm anxious and I'm angry and I'm down at times, but I'm successful in my sport, my job, or whatever it is. I'm actually doing all right. But we have a responsibility, I believe, to think about Ellis's notion of long-term hedonism, long-range hedonism. Maybe hedonism isn't even the right term, but there is obviously Epicureanism in REBT as well as Stoicism. But to me, it's like long-term fulfillment and contentment. So is what you're believing and how you're functioning now and the rules that you're creating for yourself, is that useful and applicable across the different aspects of your life over the long term? Now, it's hard to predict, isn't it? Hard to predict how we develop beliefs now, whether they're going to be useful for the long term or not, which is why REBT gives us a nice structure around rationality and rational beliefs and living our lives with a logical, scientific mindset that has an eye on, okay, we'll make sure this is sustainable in the long term. And I think that's a tricky conversation to have, because it's like, well, the person could say, the client could say, yeah, but this belief is helping me in this context now. It's actually driving my performance and helping to do that. My comeback to that, not that you need a comeback, but my how I would lead conversation through that is to focus on the long term and to help the individual to see themselves as more than just an athlete. That is part of your identity, but it's not your entire identity. That's the first part for me. The second part is, well, as a performer, surely the idea is to develop your competence to the extent that you can go into a performance situation, regardless of what you believe, and still perform well. Shouldn't it be to develop my skills to the point where I can execute them under pressure in a range of situations, regardless of these kind of internal ways that I'm directing myself? So why does it take a must for you to perform well?